care of that life. If I did anything wrong, I could be sued. If anybody's in an accident and a fetus is killed, they can be sued. If in a violent act a fetus is killed, you can be charged with murder. There is no reason in the world that this government can't protect life rather than the destruction of life like they do when they finance abortion. That has to stop. And the most important way that can be stopped is the reversal and the elimination of that horrible ruling. Roe versus Wade must be reversed. I am an advocate, a very strong advocate, of following very strictly the rule of law, the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution was written very precisely to restrain the power and force of government and to protect the liberties of each and every one of us.
All individuals have a natural right to their life and liberty, and we don't get these rights from our government. We get these rights from our Creator. We get them in a natural way. The only purpose of government is to protect those rights, never to limit those rights in any way. The government has no rights. Sometimes they'll ruin a court case and say it's in the interest of the government we have to minimize the right of the individual. I find this very annoying because the government was there to protect our rights. Take, for instance, the issue of privacy. The government should be protecting our privacy. And what's happening today? Since 9/11, we've had so many laws passed that have undermined our privacy. At the same time, what's happening to government is more secretive than ever before. But the purpose of a government is to be open to the people. The people should have control of the government, but we have it reversed. Government too often now is undermining our privacy. At the same time, it's becoming more secretive. It is true that many businesses now have information on us, and sometimes we give it to them voluntarily, and that is okay. It'd be all right to give our information to the airlines or to the telephone companies. But what is bad is when these businesses voluntarily give up this private information to the government, sometimes with very little force or even with a search warrant, they give this information out. Those companies then violated our right. They shouldn't be doing this. But the fact that some private companies have information on us that we voluntarily gave them, that's a different subject than when the government comes in and forces or takes that information from private sources and then puts it into government sources and uses it against us.
But there are a few very, very important responsibilities of the federal government. One is to provide for a strong national defense. Unfortunately, we have allowed our defense to slip. We are now overreached and we have been weakened. We have a terrible problem to deal with the threat of terrorism, and we are not handling that well. There has to be a better understanding of the cause of terrorism so that we can deal with this serious, serious problem.
Terrorism is a very, very serious problem, but if we don't understand what causes it, we can't solve the problem. And I think that's where our problem is today, because we're told that terrorists come here because we're free and prosperous, and that is not the case. This represents what the CIA calls blowback. People get very aggravated and angry at us for occupying their territory and assuming that we can take over their oil. In retaliation, some of the radicals who are not part of a government get so angry at us, they're willing to commit suicide terrorism and come over here and do us harm. But they're very small in number, and we have to put that in perspective. We have to see that in context of our foreign policy. But if we do know where there's a group of terrorists planning to do harm to us, we should go after them. This is why I was so disappointed about the battle at Tora Bora. When we sent our troops over in Afghanistan to capture Osama bin Laden, we failed. We should target our enemies and go after the terrorists. We gave the authority to go after Osama bin Laden. Unfortunately, we didn't do a very good job. Osama bin Laden is still at large. At the same time, we are now occupying 2 new Muslim countries, which is nothing more an aggravation. It incites more terrorism. I believe we're in greater danger now because of our policy rather than less.
I think 9/11, quite frankly, could have been prevented if we had had a lot more respect for the Second Amendment.
The gun issue to me is a very important issue. I think most people, or at least a lot of people in this country, recognize the importance of the Second Amendment. But the big debate going on now is whether the right to own a weapon is a collective right or a personal right. Some say it's a collective right, and you as an individual do not have a right to own a weapon, and that it's a collective right that belongs to the militia. I find this preposterous because all rights are individuals. No rights are collective. And this is one of the reasons we've gotten into trouble in this country is because we put people in categories, and you get rights because you belong to this group versus this group or this group. Everybody should have equal rights because they're an individual, not because they belong to a group, and they should never have less rights because they don't belong to a particular group. Rights have to be individual.
Freedom means self-responsibility and self-reliance. It also means you get to keep the fruits of your labor. But on 9/11, the responsibility for protecting passengers had been diverted to centralized bureaucratic government. The government told us that we would be safe, that we weren't allowed to resist hijackers, and there was a prevention for having guns on the airlines. The airlines weren't even permitted to protect their passengers and their equipment. So respect for the Second Amendment certainly would go a long way. Matter of fact, if you look at every single problem we're facing today, it's because of the lack of respect for the rule of law and the Constitution. The answers can be found in the return to the rule of law and a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Liberty means that we have freedom of choice. The right to life issue is not an issue of freedom of choice. That is a definition of life. But as individuals and as families and communities, we should have freedom of choice. One of the most important choices that we should have, and we're allowing it to slip away, is the freedom of choice to educate our children. What we need is a restatement so make sure that homeschoolers and private schools are never attacked by our government. But where are we today? How many years ago has it been since the Republican Party stood for getting rid of the Department of Education and getting rid of the Department of Energy? Where are we on that? We have allowed our nation to be overtaxed and overregulated and overrun by bureaucrats. The founders would be ashamed of us for what we're putting up with.
Any great nation that overextends itself overseas and builds an empire, it comes to an end for financial reasons. This is what happened to the Soviet system and many, many other great nations, and that's what's happening to us today. We are now in 130 countries. We have 700 bases overseas. We increase our national debt by $500 billion a year, and we can't afford it. We can't even fight this war in Iraq without borrowing from the Chinese, which is rather ironic. And what happens is we resort to printing money when we need it. We're overtaxed, our economy is weakening, so we print more money to fight these wars, and those individuals, like the Chinese and the Japanese, are no longer willing to loan us those dollars back to us. That's why the dollar is weakening. Currency destruction is characteristic of a country that has overextended itself. If we don't recognize that, we are in for very serious financial problems.
We have a very unfair tax system. We need a fair tax system. That means getting rid of the IRS and repealing the 16th Amendment. A strong national defense means that we have an understanding of national sovereignty. That is slipping away from us today. The neoconservatives have taken over for the traditional conservatives, and they do not have the respect for our national borders that they should. We do not any longer have national sovereignty. We have